Muted.
And thank you guys for joining us. A little bit about the webinar 101. Again, it's helpful for each of you to mute your phone so we don't have background noise, but also for you to be able to either post questions, which you can do on the right-hand side of your screen as either a chat or a question. And then there'll be a question and answer phase of the webinar after we've sort of gone through the content for anyone that's on the call with specific questions. I think that's it about sort of the general logistics. So the webinar information that we hope to share with you today is a little bit of program background, sort of to share with you the 2016 implementation and planning and pilot grant opportunities, sort of, excuse me, share some of the application process. So those of you that are new to applying for a grant with the Agency of Agriculture will understand what the intent of the program is and be able to answer some of your questions around process. We'll share a bit about the timeline. So the RFP is now released and applications are due soon, and we'll share that timeline with you. Ethan and Allie can talk a little bit about the partnership between the agency and Vermont Feed and the technical assistance that's available to schools applying for grants, and then once they have a grant. Give you some grant writing tips to have successful applications, and then introduce you to the Farm to School Network if you're not already familiar. So the Vermont Farm to School Grant Program, if it's a new area for you, is a program that provides Vermont schools and school districts with funds to create farm to school grant programs around integrating local food and local agriculture into schools through their cafeterias, their classrooms, and community. So Vermont Feed and the Agency of Agriculture refer to this as the 3 Cs. The partnership is about a collaboration between the Agency of Agriculture, the Agency of Education, the Department of Health, and Vermont Feed, which stands for Food Education Every Day. So we're really grateful and proud of the opportunity to have ag, education, and health literacy engaged in our Farm to School Grant Program. A bit about the program goals. So first of all, the objective is to maximize the amount of locally grown food that are fresh and nutritious served in Vermont schools and available to Vermont students. Really hoping to educate students to have culture change resulting in healthier eating habits, around creating communication, or connection between farms and where our food comes from, how it's grown, connection to the local agricultural community. By increasing the amount of local food available at schools, also has an opportunity of increased market access for Vermont producers. And when we see fresher, more nutritious, and appetizing meals served at schools, we also see an increase in school meal participation. So looking forward to seeing that increased selection of foods available to students having those community impacts beyond just the immediate effect in the individual school.
So this is Allie Zapparo, and I'm going to be taking it over from here. I'm going to just go over the 2 different kinds of grants, and real quick about eligibility. As Abby mentioned, Vermont schools are eligible for these grants. And there's 2 different kinds of grants, a planning grant and an implementation grant. The program itself is designed so that one school would receive a planning and pilot grant and move towards an implementation grant over the course of developing their farm to school program. The planning grants are 12-month in duration, and those can be funded up to $2,500 for action planning and to pilot farm to school activities. Planning grant recipients also receive required technical assistance, which is overall coordinated by our partners at Vermont Feed and delivered by our regional farm to school organizations. Our implementation grants are 18 months in duration, and they can be up to $10,000 to implement farm-to-school activities that can include school gardening, food procurement strategies, professional development for teachers and food service, equipment purchases, etc. There's a wide range of activities and purchases that can be made with an implementation grant, and there's more detailed information in the RFP about that. And then this year, as we did last year, included in this grant opportunity is a separate grant opportunity, the Vermont Milk Cooler Grants. We have the supplemental milk cooler grant program, which is made possible by our Vermont dairy farmers, and that's the last page of the application. That's actually a separate source of funding and a separate opportunity, and we do hope that you consider applying for that as well. So to get a little bit more in detail about planning grants, the planning and pilot grants are designed to develop your strong, committed farm-to-school team. It could come from your existing wellness team or a new group, such as a farm-to-school committee. Farm-to-school activities can be piloted during your planning grant period, and therefore expenses can be included in the budget for pilot activities. So for example, you can purchase local food for taste tests, or buy materials to build a snack cart. But they are designed to be more pilot projects, so smaller and but actionable is preferred. And as I mentioned before, additional technical assistance is provided to all farm-to-school planning grantees now, which is a requirement, and it's coordinated by Vermont Feed and delivered by regional farm-to-school organizations. Our implementation grants, those are for more developed programs, schools that have moved along the continuum a little bit further, already have a farm-to-school committee or established network, but would like to implement a program. So activities that can be included, as I mentioned, local food procurement strategies, classroom curricula development, or connecting with the Greater Ag Committee. Implementation grants are, as I mentioned, designed to complement schools that have successfully completed a planning and pilot grant. So while it's not a requirement, we are really pleased to see former planning grantees apply for implementation grants, as that is the intention of the continuum of our farm-to-school grant programming. And grants are intended to implement sustainable grant programs that will last long after the grant funds are gone. So not only do you implement long-lasting activities and purchase equipment that will be used during the duration of the 18-month grant period, we do expect that you can demonstrate that the program will last long after the grant funds have gone. Farm-to-school activities that our grant program can fund include gardening, conducting taste tests in school cafeterias, visiting a local farmer who supplies product to the school lunch program, classroom cooking activities, gleaning, and much, much more. There are a large array of activities that can be done with a grant. On our website, there are a couple of case studies of a pilot and implementation grantee that you can look at just to get an idea of what they did with their program. So to access our farm-to-school applications, as many of you probably already know, please visit our Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets website, and you can click on the Grant Program tab under the Grants tab, and that's at the upper right-hand side of the screen. Our website is agriculture.vermont.gov, and when you do get to that tab for the Grants tab, you actually have to hover over it for the menu choices to appear. And then once that menu drops down, you can click on the Farm to School Grant Program link. In addition to the grant program applications, both RFPs for the planning and implementation grants and those case studies that I mentioned, you'll also find a sample budget and a sample objectives, activities, and timeline section. And that could be helpful as you form your application to kind of know what we're looking for. So the applications need to be postmarked or received by Friday, November 6th at 4 p.m. We prefer that you submit them electronically. You can send those to my email, which is below. And when you do send it, we really prefer that it's in one PDF. So if you send it as just one document PDF, that is the preferred delivery method. You can do that by scanning all of the separate pieces of the application and then saving it as a document. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach me. I'm always happy to answer questions if you're unfamiliar with that process. And you can mail them to our agency. We do have an address on the RFP, but again, we prefer that they are submitted electronically. And if you do mail it, it needs to be postmarked by November 6th. So once you are nearly complete with your application, or as you complete it, we do require 3 letters of support. And it can be in the form of 2 letters, one being a joint letter, or 3 letters, 3 separate ones. So we require a school administrator to provide a letter of support. We also require your food service director to submit a letter of support. We feel very strongly that both the administrator and the food service director need to be on board, as they're very important parts of the Farm to School program of any school. And then in addition to that, we want a letter of support from a stakeholder in Farm to School, which can be another food service person, or a teacher, or a nurse, farmer in the community, or a parent in the community, or a school board member, or another member of the community. And again, the letter from the school administrator and the food service director can be combined if they both sign it, but you can also feel free to submit 2 separate letters so that you have 3 in total. So just to go over some of the timelines, as I mentioned, and I'll mention it again, the applications are due Friday, November 6th by 4:30 p.m. Once we have the applications, we will have a grant committee review those applications. And that grant committee is made up of representatives from all the 3 Cs in other state agencies, namely the Agency of Education and the Department of Health, and the Farm to School Network. We have a committee that is made up of diverse representatives who are familiar with Farm to School and can review applications in a way that can lead to the best choices possible. And we will notify schools in early December of 2015. We do expect to review the applications around early to mid-November. Schools will receive funding in January of 2016. And in February 10th, and this is important that you mark this on your calendar, the Vermont State House Farm to School Awareness Day, which happens every year, will be on February 10th, 2016, and it's actually going to be a full day of activities, but as a grantee, we do require you to be in attendance for our award ceremony, which takes place from 4 to 6:30. And that event includes remarks given by the Department of Health, Agency of Education, and Vermont Agency of Agriculture, leadership, and it is attended by legislators, many former farm-to-school grantees, students, administrators, our technical service providers, and is held in the State House cafeteria. When you do receive your grant, as I mentioned, the planning and pilot grants are 12 months in duration, so the grants begin in just January. This year it'll be 2016, and then it will conclude in December of 2016. The implementation grants are 18 months, they're longer. Again, they will begin in January of 2016, but will conclude in June of 2017. We strongly discourage extensions on planning grants because it does put schools out of sync for implementation grant eligibility should they want to apply. If a school needs an extension on their implementation grant, this can be accommodated within reason. Our goal is really to see successful development of farm-to-school planning programming at your school. Your school really needs to be committed to the time frame of the grant that you apply for, so make sure you are aware of and all of the partners involved are aware of the timelines that come with these grants. So when you do get a grant, you are entering into a grant agreement with the state of Vermont. Payments operate on a reimbursement basis. So you'll actually get 40% of your grant up front, and then 40% of the grant will come after the interim progress report is submitted and accepted. The final 20% of the grant funding will come to your school upon completion of the project and after the final grant report has been submitted and accepted along with other financial information. And this is all outlined in the grant agreement that we draw up. Planning interim reports must be submitted no later than July of 2016 if you're a planning grantee, with a final report at the end of December. And the implementation interim report would be due in December of 2016, with the final report due at the end of June 2017. Again, this will all be in your grant agreement once you are awarded, but it is important to keep these dates in mind as the reporting does take some time to complete, and you will receive the interim and final reports ahead of time so you're aware of what the questions will be, so that as you go through the grant project you can keep in mind what you'll be asked in the reporting. Schools will need to submit a certificate of insurance for $1 million and name the state of Vermont as an additional insured. And that's for grants that are equal to or greater than $10,000. And we typically don't have grants that are more than that for farm to school. As I mentioned, it's up to $10,000, but it is important that we mention this. And schools that have not received a grant through the state of Vermont will also need to submit a W-9. So these are just good things to keep in mind, but again, it'll be outlined in your grant agreement. So Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Vermont Feed, which is a collaboration between Shelburne Farms and Northeast Organic Farming Association, have had a long-lasting and unique public and nonprofit partnership. We use a legislative appropriation to provide grant funds to school districts and schools, and Vermont Feed uses their years of nutrition and education experience to support the development and implementation of farm-to-school grant programs. Vermont Feed now oversees all and coordinates all technical assistance provided by our regional organizations that deliver technical assistance to planning grantees. And in some instances where there is no regional organization, Vermont Feed provides the technical assistance directly to grantees. And at this time, I will transition to Ethan Bodine of Vermont Feed so he can talk a little bit about that technical assistance and some of the required dates for the timeline for our planning and pilot grantees.
Great, thanks, Allie. We can actually go ahead to the next slide. That's just a little piece there on Vermont Feed. Great, and so as Allie mentioned, Feed will help to kind of coordinate the technical assistance portion of the planning grants and pilot grants for the schools. And what that's going to look like, Allie did already mention February 10th. It's the important date because that is the Farm School Awareness Day, and it's when kind of the grants are publicly awarded. And it's just a great opportunity to promote your program, to highlight the good work you're doing, as well as make the legislators and other folks throughout the state aware of what's happening at your school. And we do really appreciate having folks come, and it's a good chance to see other schools that have also received grants this year. Please note there in the printed RFPs that have gone out, we did just make a couple changes based on when we landed on a few of these other dates. So I believe in the printed materials it says February 9th for the webinar. Note that that's actually before the Farm School Awareness Day, so we're on the day after a Thursday. We will actually we'll host a short webinar just around kind of planning practices. And we'll kind of present a rubric that Vermont Feed likes to use to help with the planning, and that's kind of just to, for your school and your school team to kind of come together, kind of deeper understand the planning process. And that's also then to help prepare you and set you up for a March 10th date, where the location will be determined based on the schools that get selected this year. We'll try and find a central location, and that, though, on March 10th we will have a one-day action planning kind of workshop. It'll be a chance for all the school teams receiving planning grants to attend. As you see, we really are requiring at least 3 members. It's really crucial that the more team members you can get to commit to coming on that day, just the better and the stronger your plan is going to be. There'll be opportunities for questions, chance to talk to other schools, to network a little bit, to learn about some resources, and to really start to build on the planning rubric from the webinar on the February 11th, and then on the 10th to really develop a kind of a comprehensive action plan that your team can really work on, that's highlighting some pilot projects you're going to undertake during this planning grant cycle, and kind of have a roadmap for your way forward. And then basically, even before that date happens, from between February and November, there'll be, you'll have the option to receive 15 hours of kind of on-site technical assistance or coaching, either from Vermont Feed, as Allie mentioned, if your school is not in a region currently served by another regional organization, or by a regional organization. And that actually might be a change to the printed materials as well. I believe it said between March and November, but just realizing that the grants will be awarded in January. You're going to be thinking about what to do with your teams. You're going to have questions. So just letting you know that beginning in February is a great time to just get in touch with whoever, Vermont Feed or your regional technical assistance provider, just to check in. You might have some questions about the planning process, and so we just wanted to make sure that time frame is noted as well. And like we said, so that those 15 hours could look like a couple visits early on, right after you've received your grant, just to kind of talk strategy, to think about your action plan, to maybe assess different situations either on the ground in the classroom or in the cafeteria, to try and highlight a couple pilot projects you might want to undertake. And then really kind of the rest of that time frame all the way through November will just be times when somebody's available to you, whether that is to come and help facilitate some sort of pilot, whether that's a taste test or doing a new activity in the garden, or if it's just thinking partners, or working with somebody to come in and provide technical assistance or professional development to either your food service staff or your teachers. But that's kind of that time frame there, and that's where you can kind of count on 15 hours of support. And the one thing I want to hit on, just as Allie mentioned, these are really more of the mandatory process. And in years past, we realized we maybe weren't as clear, or people didn't quite pick up that these are really critical to the planning grant. Folks might have ideas coming in. They might have really concrete examples of something they want to do, and that's fantastic. We encourage folks to really kind of know what you want out of your farm school program. But we also do bring many years of experience working with schools and understand that sometimes Schools really need to be thinking about who's involved on your committee. Allie mentioned earlier a strong and committed team, and that's really critical just for the success of farm-to-school programs. So this planning grant and pilot period we really look at as a time to solidify your core team members, to identify good farm-to-school activities that are doable, smaller and actionable, Allie also mentioned, and those are things to kind of dry run and get set up so that you can build to an implementation grant and you can really get a solid program developed. I think that's probably it on there. You can probably go to the next slide, I think. And so again, this was kind of touching base on this, but these are just some of the options that FEED kind of offers in terms of technical assistance, and these are all pretty similar to a lot of what the other regional groups offer as well. So being able to available on the phone for just some questions, to running or helping to facilitate a meeting, farm-to-school meeting at your school that might involve the community, helping kind of on that visioning process, certainly helping to identify resources and where different trainings are throughout the state and connecting you with those resources and just those opportunities. You said building that action plan is a really key component to this planning grant, and that will actually happen on that March 10th date. So you have a lot of time moving forward this year to work on that action plan and to work on those steps. And so like we said, and those other pieces there really are what kind of both Vermont Feed and other regional groups are around here to do. So we look forward to working with you throughout this process.
So this is Abby Willard again. We wanted to give everyone a sense of some successful grant writing suggestions, recognizing that every year we receive an excess of applications beyond what our state allocation is. Therefore, this is a competitive granting process, and that it's really important to make sure that each applicant and school or collaborative of schools tells their story. And so some of our recommendations and suggestions are to make sure that your application is measurable and quantitative so that the review committee can determine the objectives of your project and of your proposal. Be honest but yet passionate. Tell your story in ways that we can become excited for you as you either develop your farm-to-school program or are beginning to implement your action plan through an implementation grant. It's always good suggestions for your team to review the application before you submit it to make sure you've answered all the questions and that the application is complete. Really be attentive to your timeline and your deliverables to ensure that they're reasonable. So in certain cases, grant extensions or amendments are afforded, recognizing that people's plans change, but sort of doing your best up front to sort of determine what a reasonable set of outcomes and a timeline might be will make for, I think, a more successful project and application. In the list of questions to submit for the application, there's an attention to sustainability. So planning grantees should identify the obstacles for engaging partners and ensure that their plan will align with the school's wellness initiatives. So as a resource to help in that process, there's a recently updated Vermont School Wellness Policy Guideline that was just amended by the Agency of Health, or excuse me, Agency of Education, Department of Health, and Agency of Agriculture. So take a look at that resource if you're not familiar. It actually specifically references areas where farm-to-school programming can fit into meeting your wellness goals. For implementation grants, remember to describe how your team plans to permanently increase capacity for serving local food and integrating farm-to-school into your everyday school activities. Making sure that your implementation strategies demonstrate a strong commitment to the 3 C's, as we said, in the cafeteria, the classroom, and the community, and a plan for how you ensure sustaining your program into the long term. And as Ali mentioned, there are resources and templates on the agency's webpage at agriculture.vermont.gov that will be helpful in completing your application.
So that concludes the description of the RFP for the grant opportunity, but I wanted to take this moment to encourage all of you, if you're not already on the Vermont Farm to School Network listserv, to sign up for it. This is a snapshot of the current webpage, so it's vermontfarmtoschool.org. And up there on the right top corner is, sorry, you can actually join the listserv on the right tab right there. And then sign up for the listserv and get weekly updates from me. And it's also an interactive listserv, so you can post questions and ask for resources over the listserv. It's pretty useful and just a really great resource to have. And at this point, if you have questions, we are here to answer them. So you can unmute yourself and announce your name and school if you have a question.
Allie, I have one quick, this is Ethan, I have one quick clarification I left out.
Sure.
I just wanted to let folks know that in thinking about the fact that we have requested some mandatory dates to attend, as in that March 10th date, and the webinar shouldn't be a problem, but really it might just be both the Farm School Awareness Day at the State House and the March 10th date for the action planning. Those would be good places to make sure you do write in monies in the grant for subs or something like to help offset that, because we have had schools in the past say they weren't aware of the attendance and didn't have money in the budget for that. So that would be something to make sure that you are planning for so that you can attend those dates. Thanks.
So this is Abby again. As host of the webinar, I can see some people posting questions, so I'm happy to report those out and see if Allie and Ethan have some suggestions. One question that was posted earlier was if a collaborative of schools was looking to apply for a grant, would they want letters of support from both schools, and how would that 3 minimum letters of support sort of work in the case of a cohort of schools applying? Allie, do you have any suggestions for a school?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've actually answered this question recently, and I think, I think it would be best to have supporting letters from both schools or all the schools involved. If it is a collaboration, I think that the Grant Review Committee would want to see evidence that both schools have committed partners and how they're going to contribute.
And if the collaborative refers to a district level, knowing if there's a superintendent involved, that's always really helpful to know that they're on board and believe in this. And then, as Allie said too, we would like to see multiple stakeholders at the different schools, so we know it's not just one school and maybe one coordinator or something at the other school who wants to kind of attach themselves to it. If it's something that's going to be connected to their both cafeteria programs or kind of across the district in terms of teacher professional development, it would be good to indicate that on the application.
Another question is coming in around the offering of technical support for implementation grant recipients. So this is coming from a school that has received a planning grant and really appreciated the TA as they were developing their action plan and working through their planning grant. So what technical assistance is available at the implementation phase?
Yeah, Abby, that's a great question. From the state of Vermont's perspective in the Farm to School grant program, we we don't have resources to provide technical assistance for the implementation grants. We do hope that the planning grantees that have received the technical assistance can continue to use the information and the resources that they've received, but at this time we do not include technical assistance for our implementation grantees. That said, our regional partners, so our regional organizations and Vermont Feed do have sometimes offer technical assistance. Oftentimes it's a fee for service, but really we're expecting our implementation grantees to be able to independently implement farm to school grant programs. We really want to see a program that is sustaining from within and that can sustain in the long term if one or two champions either leave the school or school system or there's a shift. So we want to make sure that our implementation grantees are at a much more advanced level, but that said, there are resources throughout the state for technical assistance. We just don't cover it in the grant. If there's a specific farm to school coordinator in the budget, that's acceptable, and that in the past has been, we'd prefer to see someone within the school system, so I would examine your school district or SU or school to see, to really utilize the resources that you have as much as possible. Abby, is there anything you wanted to add, or Ethan?
Yeah, just one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if, thinking about technical assistance, if folks are thinking the long-term sustainability of their program and they're thinking, well, we have a solid core team from our planning grant, but we want to extend that to other teachers, I believe that, putting in money in the budget for professional development funds for other teachers or for community members to attend farm to school workshops or something of that nature that will help them to deepen their own understanding and deepen the program, I believe that would be an acceptable use of the funds. So like Ali said, it might be writing it in for a fee for service, and that would just mean contacting your regional partners or Vermont Feed, kind of see what we offer. Or like I said, or attending different things that are happening throughout the state. That would be something that I would think would help to deepen your program, and you might want to set aside some funding to enable your committee to attend those type of events.
Yeah, so professional development is something that we do fund, and it is in the RFP that we don't allow for registration fees for Junior Iron Chef or similar events, but yeah, we do allow for professional development to be funded through the grant program, both for food service and also for teachers and in the classroom, and if it is a professional development opportunity that can really demonstrate long-term sustainability, then that certainly would be looked very favorably upon.
So another question actually from Laura Brown at Floodbrook School. Her question is around, when would you advise a school to apply for a planning grant as opposed to an implementation grant? So in their case, they already have a school garden and they have a farm to school focus committee. Are they eligible for an implementation grant, or should they start with a planning grant first?
That's a great question, and certainly not an easy one to answer, unfortunately. But I think that if you review the RFP fairly closely, the planning grants are really about creating an action plan and really bringing together resources, working on the 3 C's. So a school might have a school garden, and they might already be procuring local food, but there might not be 3 C's incorporation. The community within the school and outside the school might not be poised to move into an implementation of a program, and you might not have the action plan in place that you would from a planning grantee. So I think if you look at all of the things that you get with a planning grant, and then you review the application for the implementation grant, and you know, feel that your school is ready to receive the implementation grant and are at a point where the development of a planning grant has kind of already happened, then I would say apply for an implementation grant. But if your school is at a little bit lower developmental stage, then you might want to apply for a planning grant. You might also want to spend a year doing the work of a planning grant if you are kind of in the middle, and just reading the RFP and trying to put together an action plan. That's also something that some schools do. They just decide that, you know, they're not quite there yet with an implementation grant, but they just don't think that they are a planning grant candidate. Some schools just do wait until they're ready to apply for an implementation grant. It's not very black and white, and it certainly is a continuum, but I think there are a lot of factors to consider, and the RFP does, I think, you know, outline pretty well whether or not your school might be ready.
Yeah, Allie, I think sorry.
Go ahead, Ethan. I'll go
clarify. Yeah, I was going to say, Allie, I think you make a really good point there about some schools who might have a garden, might even have a committee in place. One way of thinking about utilizing a planning grant in that situation is that it gives you that chance to go a little deeper and to really refine some of those kind of pilot or initial stages in your program that you might be doing, and trying to just really deepen it and bring in more support and kind of widen that net to your community or the committee even. So just, you know, you might be at a point where you're a little more further along. You might have a team. You might have even developed some form of an action plan, but it sometimes doesn't hurt to take that extra year, as Ali said, just to kind of go a little slow and do a few things really well. That also being said, we've had the same question from a couple of groups that participated in the Farm to School Institute, where they really did kind of come together with a solid team and create a pretty robust action plan. And in those circumstances, like Ali said, I would just weigh your individual situation and question whether or not is a planning grant right for one more year, or are we ready for an implementation grant? And I think some of the schools in that situation may be ready for implementation grants, but you're just going to have to really do it on your own unique situation.
Perfect answer. So any other questions out there from the group? You're welcome to post them or unmute yourself and sort of ask them live to the group. Some of you I still have manually muted because I don't see that you're self-muting, and I just wanted to limit any background noise that may be occurring. But for those of you that are unmuted and may have any additional questions, we have a few more minutes, or anyone is also welcome to post a question. Great, I'm not sharing any additional questions. You can always contact either Ali or Ethan with specific questions about the technical assistance, about farm to school programming, about the regional organizations in your community if you're not familiar with the groups that might be available to help with technical assistance around farm to school. And then please consider applying by November 6th by accessing an application off of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets website at vermontagriculture.gov. And if there's no other questions, thanks so much for joining today's webinar, and we hope to see applications from all of your schools and look forward to working with you over the coming years to engage in building farm to school at every school. Thanks so much.